On today's edition of the show, we'll be bringing in a special guest on the show, Jessica Blaylock from Bally Sports Florida, to discuss the Florida Panthers in their last 4 games and now being back in a wild card spot. We're going to discuss the importance of a third goalie in the NHL, and we're going to preview tonight's game between the Florida Panthers and the Ottawa Senators.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Thursday, April 6th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're to our team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers, as well on Instagram as well. And don't forget to also subscribe to the YouTube channel and send in your screenshot of your subscription to LO_FLA Panthers on Twitter or Instagram, or email it to me at lockedonflapanthers@gmail.com for your chance to win 2 free tickets to the Florida Panthers versus Toronto Maple Leafs game on April 10th. Best of luck, everybody. So, Cats fans, we've had a little over 24 hours now to process the win for the Cats, not only them being in a wild card spot, but the top wild card spot, only the tiebreaker between them and the New York Islanders for the 7th spot. So if the season ended today, it's still Florida Panthers versus Carolina Hurricanes in round 1, but still a long way to go with 4 games left. But this is a great time for me to bring in my guest on the show. You hear her every pre-intermission and post-game on Bally Sports Florida. She is Jessica Blaylock. Jessica, welcome back to Locked On Panthers.
Thank you so much for having me. And as you know, when I join you, I've got my best friends with me. So I apologize in advance if they start barking. It's just because they're just as excited about Florida Panthers hockey as I am.
Oh, yeah. My fur baby is somewhere around there. My cat, she likes to wander around. And then occasionally jump on my desk during the show. But as far as being a podcaster for the Florida Panthers and having a cat, one thing I love doing is just doing cat references as far as hockey and my actual pet. Most of my text messages to Aaron Brown of the Hockey News are related to cats since we both have cats. But right. I also want to thank you for from the bottom of my heart, thank you for on a day where the Marlins already played an afternoon game and the Florida Panthers are off, that you took the chance out of your day to come on this show to talk about the state of the Panthers.
Hey, this is an exciting day for the Cats being in a playoff spot, an exciting day for the Marlins, beating the Twins earlier today, exciting night last night with the Panthers beating the Buffalo Sabres and with Sandy pitching a complete game shutout. So this has been a great 48 hours, and this is a perfect time to talk some Panthers hockey.
Yeah, and then right before the Florida Panthers do take the ice again tomorrow, the Miami Marlins will have a game tomorrow at an afternoon game as the Mets will open.
Actually, the Mets tweeted out that because of rain, they're going to postpone opening day until Friday.
Oh,
for the Mets.
That's news to me. So
Marlins are off tomorrow now, and that game has been moved to Friday.
Yeah, you when Major League Baseball does those gaps in between the games for teams that don't have a roof, of course you have to go with those situations. But I want to ask you this question going to hockey and all that. But with over the last year and a half, correct me on the timeline based on your role with Bally Sports and even before Fox Sports Florida, is you've had more of the opportunity to be more of doing more of being the pre-intermission and post-game person, of course splitting the time with Craig Minervini, but of course with that is not as much traveling for road games. Of course you're staying put mostly in South Florida, but how different is it for you watching a game when you are in the Bally Sports studio in Fort Lauderdale versus being in the arena and your excitement level and just processing everything?
Yeah, it's definitely different. And this has been an awesome year for me, just in the sense of having the opportunity to grow a lot personally in the way that I cover the game by getting the chance to be on the desk for so many pre and post games and intermissions. And obviously I miss traveling. I love traveling. I love being with the team. I love seeing the different arenas around the country. But, you know, this is, like I said, this has also just been a huge year for me to grow personally and the way I watch the game and the notes that I take, and, you know, just the difference in the role of being a host and what I focus on to set up my analyst versus being a reporter and looking for more of the stories that I can, you know, report on to help people get to know the players. So I've always tried to do a good job of listening to Goldie and listening to Randy and listening to whether it's Jovo or Chick and what they're saying about the game, with the understanding that those guys are always going to know infinitely more about the game than I ever will, especially Randy, Jovo, and Chick having played the game themselves. So that hasn't changed much, just as far as the way that I listen to the game and pay attention to the game and notes that I take and things like that. Really, the biggest difference is just understanding that my role this season is more focused on knowing how to set up my analyst and different things that we need to break down versus the more personal aspects of helping people get to know the players and some of the things that you can really do as a reporter and, you know, constantly being around, especially on the road, and the things that you can kind of bring to the table when you're with the team almost in a 24/7 capacity.
Yeah, no doubt, and it's definitely a different feel, and for your role specifically, it's kind of like a point guard, but a broadcast version of being a point guard in your role, and of course, I can only imagine how fun those pre game meetings are. Of course, whenever I do the few times that I have gone to morning skate, of course I see you guys to the side near the Merit vault out in section 101, and then you of course I'm not usually around when you guys huddle up to do like your light the lamp picks and all that stuff. But I also I think that's a really cool growth moment for you, especially now. But I do want to ask you, based on the ups and downs of the Panthers, most of this recently has been on the road. Of course, the big win in Detroit a few weeks ago that put them back in the wild card spot. Of course, they dropped to Philly on the second end of a back-to-back. You come home, lose the two against New York, Toronto, and then Keith Tkachuk calling out the team. The Panthers responding now with ending that road trip, getting 6 out of 8 to now beating the Buffalo Sabres, basically ending their season. How has the roller coaster of emotions been for you from Panthers going to a playoff spot, 4 games losing streak, to now season-long 4-game winning streak?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, one of the things that I always do is really tie myself emotionally into the teams that I cover. You know, I know it would probably be easier for myself if I step back a little bit, but I just don't know how to do that because I love my job. I love the teams that I get the opportunity to talk about and report on and host for. And so I don't always know how to separate myself emotionally from my job. But yeah, it's definitely been, I mean, it's a perfect description, is emotional roller coaster. And I think if you kind of look back over these last couple of weeks, you know, the Panthers have essentially been playing in playoff games since January, you know, understanding the position that they were in, understanding the importance of every game and how important, you know, every 2 points were. And I think when they finally got themselves back into a playoff spot, I think it was after that win over Detroit, that they were back in the in the second wild card spot, there was a little bit maybe of just an exhaustion factor in the sense that for 3 months, basically, every game their back has been up against the wall. Every night, it's a 10 out of 10 in the importance level of winning a game. So I think after spending so much emotion and so much hard work and so much energy and effort and intensity into getting themselves in a playoff spot, they just hit a little bit of a wall when they lost those 4 straight games. And I think missing Sam Bennett was a big hit. I think if you look at the numbers, and we did that recently on a pregame show, if you look at the numbers of what the Panthers have done when Sam Bennett has been in the lineup versus when he hasn't been in the lineup, the numbers it's a pretty stark contrast and just proves what an important piece of the puzzle he is. So, I think between just the emotion that was spent to get back into a playoff spot and then having to play a couple of games without Sam Bennett, it just kind of took its toll. But then the Panthers get back into a playoff spot by winning 4 straight. And I think a huge part of it was the impassioned, I don't know if plea is the right word. I don't know if like Paul Maurice said, it was more just something he needed to get out to the team. But, we saw Coach get very frustrated and very emotional behind the bench in the second period of that game against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I think that's really the moment that kind of was the catalyst for getting these guys back on track. And, Coach Maurice said after the game, he gave a lot of credit to the players and the fact that was more of a player-driven win. And I asked him about that recently, and he said, at this point of the season, it's not about the coaching staff, it's about the players driving the success out on the ice. And ever since that emotional outburst, whatever you want to refer to it as, the players have truly taken ownership of the way that they've had to play out on the ice, and they've gone 4-0 since then. So whether it was what Paul Maurice said, whether it was the players finally taking accountability out on the ice and ownership of Coach's message, I think that was really the moment that kind of got things going back on the right track.
Yeah, and it's definitely manifesting itself now with resulting in the 4 wins in a row, and now where the Panthers are in with 4 games left in the season. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more of the importance of the third goalie, and of course, what is the latest on Sergei Bobrovsky and Sam Bennett. We're going to discuss that next here on the show. But first, we're going to tell you all about Indeed. And Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Hate waiting? Indeed's US data shows that 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Indeed does the hard work for you. Sponsor a job will match you with quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed fit your job description right when you post. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Segment number 2 here on this special edition, this State of the Cats edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where I have Jessica Blaylock from Bally Sports Florida here on the show to discuss everything of the Florida Panthers. And Jess, we can't talk without mentioning probably the most important person to why the Florida Panthers have gone on their 4-game winning streak, and it's Alex Lyon, the Lion King. Of course, DJ Brandon Montour has played I just can't wait to be king almost every single game after the Florida Panthers have won recently. And I want to go more into the importance of the third goalie, because last year when Spencer Knight was struggling, of course, the benefit of the ELC was sending him to Charlotte, having Jonas Johansson when they picked him off waivers last year. It was Sergei Bobrovsky's net to play for a good period of time. Jonas Johansson only had 2 games. But this time around, of course, with the Panthers, this version of the team can't outscore all their problems like they could last year. So it makes even that third goalie even more important when you bring in a guy like Alex Lyon. Spoke about it more yesterday about how the resume, being 30 and being around the league and winning a Calder championship. But just with this stretch of having to start this many games, just 2 weeks ago, Jess, we were talking about probably how many games is Alex Lyon going to start, assuming that Bobrovsky was not going to have an illness, a non-COVID illness recently. But who would have thought, first of all, that he would get these 4 straight starts? And second of all, it just goes to show the importance of that third goalie.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think any guy that you talk to in that dressing room knows how important Alex Lyon has been over these past 4 games. And you look at some of the games that he's been called upon to, step in and step up. Huge win against Boston earlier this season. Huge win against Boston. Helping the Panthers get that win in overtime against the Toronto Maple Leafs, which essentially might have been the game that saved their season and saved their playoff hopes. The monster save he made against Austin Matthews in OT. And then, just like he talked about, obviously the goaltender situation has been a little bit more fluid this year, in the sense that at the beginning of the season, we saw Sergei Bobrovsky and Spencer Knight really split time. And I think part of that was Paul Maurice getting familiarity with his goaltenders. And then obviously just what has kind of gone on with Spencer and him dealing with some things off the ice. And knowing that, Bobrovsky really was going to be the guy down the stretch to get the, no pun intended, the lion's share of games to finish the season. But the fact that the Panthers have been able to call upon Alex Lyon, the way that he has gotten the job done in some really critical situations. I mean, that game against the Sabres the other night was unbelievable, and such an important game, with the implications of knowing that the Panthers were trying to get themselves back into a playoff spot, that the Sabres were trying to keep themselves in the playoff conversation. And yeah, I mean, I think the Toronto win, and I think the win against the Sabres the other night, just such a hat tip to Alex Lyon and what he was able to do in both of those. But yeah, just kind of getting back to what Lyon talked about the other night, the importance of knowing what it's like to play in meaningful games, whether it's on the NHL level or whether it's, in the American Hockey League. He's won a Calder Cup, so the pressure of these games has not been too big for him. The moment has not been too big for him. And I think that's really a huge part in what has allowed him to be successful in this situation. And I give Alex Lyon all the props in the world, because it's not easy to be called back up at this time of the year, knowing what's on the line, knowing how important every single one of these games is down the stretch. And he hasn't gotten overwhelmed by that, and he's gotten the job done. So the importance of that additional goaltender and what Alex Lyon has done for the team in this stretch of games has been so unbelievably important. And I'm so happy to see the success that he's had over these last 4 games.
Yeah, and sporting a .959 save percentage, 1.25 GAA.
Yeah.
In this stretch has just been incredible. The Panthers did have practice today at FLA Live Arena, and with Paul Maurice spoke about a few days ago how he's expecting Bennett to get on the ice and of course get on the ice tomorrow, and Bobrovsky getting one step closer. What's your feel based on being at practice, and what else has Palmer, if you can give and the listeners what Paul Maurice said after practice today on their statuses.
Yeah, and still with both of those players, a kind of a day-by-day thing. With Bobrovsky dealing with the non-COVID related illness, I think the one thing that the Panthers really focus on and Paul Maurice focuses on is he's not going to put either player in a situation that they're not ready to play. Sergei Bobrovsky, unless he is fully ready to go, is not going to back up Alex Lyon. Sam Bennett, unless he's fully ready to go, is not going to get into a game because one, maybe not so much with Bobrovsky because he is just dealing with an illness that it just maybe takes a little bit of time to get better. But with Bennett, you're not going to want to put him in a game and then have him take a big step back, and then not potentially be ready for a playoff push. So if anything, I think you're going to exercise a little bit more caution to make sure that if you know that, okay, if you can rest Bennett and let him focus on getting healthy for the remainder of the season and potentially have him for the start of the playoffs, that's going to be your priority. And like I mentioned earlier, Sergei Bobrovsky knows his body so well. He is so in tune to his routine and his structure and his diet and the way that he feels, that he's going to be honest with the coaching staff, and he's going to let Paul Maurice, he's going to let Rob Tallis, he's going to let these guys know whether or not he feels good enough to go. So I think the biggest thing is maybe we see Bobrovsky back up Alex Lyon against the Senators. Maybe we see Bobrovsky back in the net Saturday against the Capitals. But you're not going to force anything just for the sake of getting a guy back in, and I know Paul Maurice also mentioned there was a chance that we could see Bennett maybe Saturday against Washington. But again, I just don't think at this point you're going to try and force anything just for the sake of forcing it. And as much as coaches and players may want to say they're not superstitious, I think there is a little something to knowing that you have rolled out the same lineup for the last 4 games and you're 4-0. So why at this point would you maybe want to mess with something that's working? So I'm fine with not rushing players back and not putting players in a position where they can't 100% be guaranteed. There they are. They want the dogs obviously agree with me. But yeah, just you want to make sure that you put players in a position to have success, and you're not going to force a player back from an injury or an illness when they're not fully ready.
Yeah, and yeah, you mentioned not putting them in a position where it could make things worse. And for Bobrovsky, if he's not playing or even backing up, it's definitely a big deal because he is very strict when it comes to just wanting to be great between the pipes. But We're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to talk more about the Panthers versus Ottawa Senators game, a little bit of recent history between these two teams. We're going to discuss the strength of schedule, and we are going to discuss a number that I saw today based on the Florida Panthers and their playoff chances. We're going to discuss that more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about FanDuel Sportsbook. And the NBA playoffs are almost here, and NHL playoffs, and it's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because now new customers getting no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line, point scores, to threes drained. Plus, FanDuel lets you combine your bets with a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Segment number 3 here on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, the State of the Cats edition of the show. So, Jess, the Florida Panthers take on the Ottawa Senators for the third and final time this season. First one came pretty early in the season. The Florida Panthers got 58 shots on goal on that game, a franchise record at the time. And the last time these two faced, the one thing I took away from that game was what the players were saying after, that they liked the way they played, but it was just a matter of going to the box a little too much. And of course, when you give up 3 power play goals and you still outscore them at even strength, you come away with that game knowing that you could, if you fix and tweak a few things as far as positioning, that you won't put yourself in the position that the Florida Panthers found themselves in last Monday against the Sens. But really, since that game, Thomas Chabot hasn't played for the Sens. He's out. He's been shut down for the season. Jake Chikrin is likely not playing again. Chances are they could go 11 F7D with Ridley Gregg likely being out, even though Daily Faceoff says he's on the second line, but he's not going to play. So we'll know more on confirmation of that. But here's also one thing, Jess. The road goal differential for the Ottawa Senators is at minus 33 on the road this season. The Florida Panthers were facing a high-powered offense in the Buffalo Sabres, but they're a good road team, the Sabres, but not so much this time around with the Panthers. I also want you to give your takeaways from last Monday's loss and how the Florida Panthers can put themselves in a better position that what happened last Monday doesn't happen again.
Well, and to add in another stat, the fact that the Panthers average a little over 4 goals per game at home. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how all those numbers weigh in. But I think, honestly, you mentioned it, it's as simple as special teams. A lot of the guys that talked after the game, like you said, mentioned they liked how they played at even strength. Actually thought they outplayed the Senators 5-on-5. But when you give up, 3 power play goals, I think of the 5 goals that the Senators scored, 3 were on the power play. That's the game right there. You know, we talk about it all the time. So often you cannot lose the special teams battle in a game and expect to win the game. So I think really when you look at this matchup with the Senators, it's as simple as playing disciplined hockey, staying out of the box, don't take penalties against the Senators, don't let them win the game by scoring 2 or 3 power play goals like you let them win the game last week. So I think the Panthers know that. I think they're well aware of, that's kind of been a point of discussion, especially over the last month and a half or so, is having to play more disciplined hockey, not taking as many penalties, especially the high stick, the offensive zone penalties. Like, those are the ones that really drive you crazy. A hook, a roughing, I kind of liken it to errors in baseball. If a guy makes a physical error in baseball, you can live with that, right? Because he's just genuinely trying to make a play. If a guy in baseball makes a mental error, like forgetting how many outs there are in the inning, that's what drives you crazy. And I think the same thing in hockey. If you accidentally trip a guy with your stick, if you get called for a hook, like a physical, almost like a physical penalty because you're trying to make a play, maybe you can live with that a little bit more than not controlling your stick and taking a high stick, a too many men on the ice, a delay of game. Like, those are the ones that are really kind of hard to kill off. So I think really the biggest key tomorrow is it's discipline. You got to stay out of the box. Simple as that.
Yeah, and that's what it's going to take to definitely come out with a win. But the Ottawa Senators have fared well against the Atlantic Division, going 14-8-1 on the season against the Atlantic. Power play is 6 in the NHL. PK is 11. So they're pretty decent on special teams. It's really the 5-on-5 play and this is home and road combined for Ottawa. 5-on-5, they're
And a
minus
team
30.
that's on the rise. Honestly,
Yes.
I look at the Senators and I think that they are a team that even if they don't, and their playoff hopes are kind of gone at this point. They went on a little bit of a run, made an interesting conversation, but obviously kind of hit a little bit of a wall themselves. But I think Ottawa is one of those teams watch out for in the coming years because they've got a lot of young, talented players. I think they really are a team that you're going to have to contend with in the NHL over the next several seasons.
Oh yeah, and especially now that they traded for Jacob Chikrin as well.
Absolutely.
That's a dangerous team in the future. I mean, that Atlantic division, the future of this division is just in really good hands with a lot of just young star talent. A little bit of a scoreboard update on and how does it relate to the Panthers, as the New York Rangers are currently leading the Tampa Bay Lightning 4-3. That's currently going on TNT. By the time this comes out, we will know the result.
Right in front of me.
Oh, okay, cool. So Jessica will be able to update if anything happens. And how does this affect the Panthers? Is with the Tampa Bay Lightning being on the second end of back-to-back tomorrow, they'll be playing the New York Islanders. And if Tampa Bay does drop this game, this means one step closer to the Toronto Maple Leafs clinching that second spot. What does that mean to the Panthers? Possible rest once they do face against each other on April 10th, next Monday at FLA Live Arena. So a very important game as far as, even though the Panthers aren't playing, they're not trying to hop over anyone. As far as looking into the future, that is important. So a little bit of an update as we are discussing here. And we talked pre-recording, Jess, about how, a number that I was just writing down, and I asked myself, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I hurting myself by doing it?
I want to hear it. I want to know what's going on.
The magic number to clinch is at 7 for the Panthers. So the Pittsburgh Penguins will be facing the Wild on Thursday. Of course, before I go on, the focus for the Panthers is still win your game against the Ottawa Senators. Win. But the Panthers could clinch as soon as this weekend. Crazy to think that after falling behind, the Panthers, as soon as Saturday night against the Washington Capitals, they could clinch a wild card spot with and the let's look at also strength of schedule. Panthers have the 10th hardest in the NHL. Of course, numbers are more skewed as the remaining games go down. Pittsburgh has the second easiest remaining. After Minnesota, their schedule opens up. New York Islanders, their schedule opens up. Game 82 for the Islanders will be on the Wednesday, not on the Thursday of next week. So how are you as far as that? How are you viewing this magic number for the Panthers as far as an ability to clinch, or are you just looking more of the Ottawa Senators are right here?
Yeah, this is going to sound so cliche, but I'll kind of echo the sentiments of the players. You really cannot look ahead. You literally have to just focus on the game that is ahead of you. And, we can talk strength of schedule. And I think one of the games that Pittsburgh has to end the season is against Columbus and whatever it may be. But honestly, every single team at this point in the season is playing for something. Tampa and Toronto are still battling it out to secure home ice for the first round of the playoffs. Carolina and Jersey are still trying to battle for top spot in the Metropolitan Division. Even teams that aren't going to make the wild card, Columbus, Montreal, whoever it may be, they're playing for, young guys who want to show coaches and the organization what they're capable of. I mean, Chicago just beat Calgary the other day. Calgary is desperately fighting for a wild card spot. Chicago has struggled this season. The whole strength of schedule. Every game at this point of the year is tough. I don't care who you're playing. Every game at this point of the year is tough. Islanders have Tampa tomorrow. Tampa, they're down right now, 4-3 to the Rangers, but Tampa has been locked in. They know that they still got something on the line. So if you start kind of trying to dig too deep into the strength of schedule and the hypotheticals and what's going to happen down these final four, yes, ideally, what would be amazing is for the Panthers to win these next 2 games and the Penguins to lose their next 2 games, and then we don't have to stress out about it, right? Or for Toronto to go ahead and secure home ice for the first round against Tampa, or for Carolina to go ahead and wrap up the Metropolitan Division. So by the time the Panthers play them the final 2 games, maybe Toronto's resting Austin Matthews and William Nylander and Mitch Marner, and maybe Carolina is resting, whoever it may be, whoever you want to point out for them. But I just think that if you start trying to look, and it's not even really that far ahead. I mean, these games are next week. There's only 4 games remaining in the season. But I think if you want to start constructing all of these hypotheticals, you just don't want to lose focus on the game that is at hand, which the game that is at hand, you have to play the Ottawa Senators. It's the only game that you can focus on right now. You can't think ahead to Washington. You can't think ahead to Toronto or Carolina. Like, you have to just focus on the Ottawa Senators and not relying on what other teams are doing, not relying on if Pittsburgh is going to lose to the Wild, not relying on if Tampa's going to beat the Islanders. You take care of your business and you don't have to worry about any of that stuff, So I think, again, as cliche as it sounds, just focus on each game one at a time, take care of business in that game, and you don't have to worry about all of the hypotheticals and extenuating circumstances that could impact your team.
Yeah, and based on all of that is how the Florida Panthers got here in the first place, just by the whole saying win and things will take care of itself. And listen, even after the game against the Senators, I was not the most optimistic person as far as how is this team going to dig out of the hole that they've dug themselves into, and here they are. I mean, Money Puck has them at over a 60% chance, and with a win in regulation, that could to 86% tomorrow. A regulation win for the Panthers as well. So you take care of a little bits here and there, and it's crazy to think, Jess, the Panthers 1 win away from being exactly at 41 wins, guaranteeing yourself 500, and also 1 road win, of course, 1 road game remaining from being at 500, 18, 19, and 4 right now, and after a porous start being on the road. So just the turnaround that this team has had in the last 37, 38 games after January 8th, that's kind of like where I looked at where the Panthers were to where they were now. Just incredible how the team's bought in. They're getting used to some special teams, still a struggle, but goaltending has been a lot better. Of course, the power play clicking as well. It's definitely one that's definitely taken that next step. Of course, you have a 40-goal scorer in Verhaeghe. You have an almost 40-goal scorer in Matthew Tkachuk once again, and of course Alexander Barkov. The points, the amount of points that he's had, I believe it's like 21 points in like 15 games. I might have that number incorrect, but just that in itself. And here Florida Panthers are right in control, own the tiebreaker, and what more can you ask in these next 4?
Yeah, and by the way, I love how I say just focus on the next game, and I'm going to be absolutely locked in on what the Islanders and what the Pittsburgh Penguins are doing. So
yes,
But you know what? That's what makes this time of the year so much fun. And honestly, as stressful as maybe these past couple weeks have been, and just the emotional roller coaster and the ups and downs, it's so good for the game. It's so good for hockey. It's so good for the NHL to see, really, in both the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference, right? Like the number of teams that have been battling for these respective 2 wild card spots in each conference. So yeah, I just I want so much for this team to be able to get into the playoffs, to get into the postseason. What they've gone through earlier in the year, dealing with the injuries, dealing with a brand new system, learning essentially a brand new way to try and win games, which is opposite of what they relied on last year, and knowing that they were going to go through some growing pains with all that. There's nothing that I want more for this team to get into the playoffs, and then just knowing that once the playoffs come, all bets are off. Anything can happen at that point. Literally anything can happen. So hopefully at this point next week, we're all breathing a collective sigh of relief, because we are now making plans for watching the Cats in the Stanley Cup playoffs.
No doubt, and that's definitely the hope for you and I, of course, and a lot of people listening to this show as well. But Jess, I want to thank you so much for jumping on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Of course, people are gonna watch you on television tomorrow, right, for the Panthers pregame show at 6:30 on Bally Sports Florida. No conflict now with the Marlins not having their game tomorrow, and of course the Miami Heat being on national television on TNT. So no conflicts as far as the programming for Bally Sports. But tell everybody where they can follow you online.
On Twitter at Jess Blaylock, on Instagram at Jess L Blaylock. And then, tune in to Bally Sports Florida tomorrow night for our pregame show at 6:30, and puck drop from FLA Live Arena against the Sens at 7.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jess, and have a good broadcast tomorrow.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Now make your second listen of the day, Game to Game NHL. Every moment, every top performance, every highlight. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NHL with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NHL, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. So I'm Armando Velez with Jessica Blaylock, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.